I was gonna start this video with a joke about CM Punk and Heat, but even I'm not that fuck. On December 26th in Madison Square Garden, CM Punk had his first match in the WWE ring since the 2014 Royal Rumble. I always thought that CM Punk's WWE TV debut was the August 1st episode of ECW on Sci-Fi, but it turns out he'd appeared in WWE a few times the year previous. There are a few appearances of future stars that WWE likes to acknowledge, maybe the most famous being Bryan Danielson facing John Cena on an episode of Velocity in early 2003. That match was even recreated as a highlight of Bryan's career in WWE 2K19. That isn't even Bryan's first time in the WWE ring, as he was appearing in dark matches under a mask as the American Dragon as early as 2000, and later would have matches on Heat and Velocity against the likes of Jamie Noble, Paul London, and his old training partner Brian Kendrick. There are some other well-known ones too, such as that clip of Brock Lesnar hitting a mighty impressive shooting star press. If you've only ever seen his WrestleMania 19 one, where he could have hurt himself very badly, it's insane to see the ungodly amount of height he was able to reach when hitting the move right. By the way, I'm aware he used to do the move in OVW, and there's footage of that too, but the clips of him doing it in the larger WWE setting just hits differently. In the weeks prior to Punk being signed by WWE, he would wrestle 2 televised matches on Sunday Night Heat, which at the time was airing on Spike TV in the US, but would move to WWE.com later the same year. On the episode that aired on April 17th, CM Punk would team with Russell Simpson in a losing effort against Simon Dean and Maven. Simpson had worked a few enhancement matches around these years, but mainly worked indies, according to Cage Match using the names Skull Manson, Psycho the Death, and Dog Cheatham, which all sound like what I'd come up with if you asked me to write a Troy McClure joke. Due to some form of miscommunication, Todd Grisham on commentary refers to Punk as Chad Collier, who is a different wrestler altogether, who was also working sporadic enhancement matches around this time. Both Todd and Jonathan Coachman seem to be under the impression that the team is called CM Punk, and Coach proceeds to bury the name. An edited version of this match is actually on WWE's YouTube channel still today, and as you can imagine, the comments are turned off. The match itself is fairly unremarkable to watch, but is it though? On the surface it's a pretty basic enhancement match, where Maven and Dean pick up the win. It turns out though, that things might not have gone the way they were meant to. Speaking recently on his YouTube channel, Maven claimed to be CM Punk's first WWE opponent, and we'll get back to that soon. But he also states that Simon Dean changed the finish of the match to protect Punk, who he saw big things in, and decided to pin Simpson instead. Maven says, "Earlier on when we were discussing the match backstage, he said when I come in, I'm gonna knock you out, Punk you roll to the floor, that way we can get the slam on Simpson." I don't know why he wanted to protect Punk, he might have seen what the world would see in Punk years later. Maven also points out that neither he or Simon got in trouble for pinning the other guy, maybe since the right team still won. And it was Sunday Night Heat after all, you're never getting away with that on Mania. Punk's next WWE match a month later would be a singles match with Val Venus, one in which it'd be pretty hard to change who gets pinned and get away with it, I suppose. It also seems, going in, that someone briefed Todd Grisham and Jonathan Coachman on the guy's name, so that's an improvement I guess. Coachman does however refer to Punk as, quote, a kid from the South. Yes, that famously southern state, Illinois. There's a bit more to this match than the previous, with Punk sneak attacking Val, turning heel in the opening minutes, and spending most of the match working on Val's leg. The entire match becomes all about Val's hurt knee, with Val not able to hit his signature moves like the Fisherman Suplex because of the potential injury. He does however make it to the top rope to hit the money shot and win. As you can probably guess, Val Venus has also talked about this match on YouTube, and as you can also likely guess, Val maybe takes a little bit too much credit for getting Punk hired by WWE. Clearly he had a role to play, with this being Punk's final match for them as an unsigned talent, and I'm not doubting that, but let me clarify what I mean. In his video from the Wrestling Shoot Interviews channel, Val essentially claims in short that he heard Punk was a guy who does lots of moves that don't mean anything. and so he structured a match around the two of them, walking in as babyfaces, Punk turning early on, and the knee injury. He repeatedly says that the fans didn't know who CM Punk was, but this match took place in Pennsylvania, where Ring of Honor's based. I'm not saying he was a local hero or anything, but there will have been people who absolutely knew who CM Punk is. At first I gave Val the benefit of the doubt, assuming he was referring to the wider TV audience, but he repeatedly calls it a dark match, so he has to be talking about the fans in the live crowd. Val's essential point is that he made Punk tell a story, which if you know Punk's work feels like a bit of a grandiose claim. Several weeks after the Val Venis match, Punk signed his WWE contract, and for maximum effect, he signed it inside a Ring of Honor ring at Sign of Dishonor on July 8th, 2005. Not only that, but he signed it on the Ring of Honor World Championship belt that he'd recently won from Austin Aries, kicking off what is still known today as the Summer of Punk. He had been a fan favourite going in, but post-match he turned to the dark side with an epic promo, maybe one of the best of his entire career. By September, he would be wrestling for OVW, WWE's then developmental territory. While I'm talking about Punk and WWE developmental, another thing I learned while writing this video is that in 2011, Punk would make a non-televised appearance for their later developmental promotion, pre-NXT, FCW. On October 1st, 2011, Punk would be called out by and would even wrestle a very young looking Dean Ambrose. In an around 20-minute match that still exists on YouTube as fan footage, CM Punk would win hitting the GTS. Speaking of people Punk had last matches with who he doesn't get on with anymore, guess who his tag team partner was in his last OVW match? Remember how I said we'd get back to Maven's claim that he was Punk's last WWE opponent? As far as being a signed WWE talent, maybe, but remember that wording for later. While these two matches are interesting to note given that they took place right before he signed with WWE, the first evidence I could find of him in their ring was neither of these. On May 12, 2003, Punk would wrestle a dark match against a wrestler called Khalsa Singh. Despite my best efforts, I couldn't find the actual match, but I did find a clip of his entrance, and being fully honest, my desire to learn more about this clip, posted by Richard Last on X, became the entire inspiration for me falling down a rabbit hole and making this video. His entrance is interesting for two reasons. Firstly, Punk was announced to the ring by the legendary voice of WWE entrances, Howard Finkel. When Punk won the WWE Championship at Survivor Series 2011, he was announced to the ring by The Fink, who received a heartwarming reception from the fans at Madison Square Garden. Finkel was introduced by WWE's more regular ring announcer at the time, Justin Roberts, as CM Punk's personal ring announcer. Partly this was a dig at his opponent that night, Alberto Del Rio, who around this time had his own personal ring announcer, Ricardo Rodriguez, as a huge part of his act. In an interview with WWE.com, Howard called this moment, quote, one of his top 3 Garden moments, and given his history in that building, that says a lot. It wouldn't surprise me if Punk requested Howard to add to him winning the WWE title at MSG. It also wouldn't surprise me if Punk wanted Finkel as his ring announcer that night, as a reference to that 2003 match where Howard first introduced him. Having said all that, the other reason this introduction is notable is far less elaborate. In the clip, Howard introduces CM Punk from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and given how tied to Chicago he is, that feels really jarring to hear, like if you heard that Superman was actually from Gotham. The explanation I've seen for this is that Punk lived in Philly at the time, and given his connection to the indies around that area, mostly Ring of Honor, and his role as a trainer at ROH's wrestling school at the time, that's likely true. When recent reports came out about Punk turning up at the Performance Center, I wasn't all that shocked. He once described his time as a trainer at Ring of Honor's wrestling school as, quote, being like a pig in shit, which sounds far worse than the expression actually means. In the same interview with Loudwire, Punk also confirms that he was living in Philadelphia, so likely given that he was an unsigned talent, they didn't care too much about where they announced him from. Incidentally, the match took place in Philly, so it could have been to get a pop from the crowd. Given the nature of WWE dark matches, especially in the days where less wrestling fans were terminally online, it's possible that this was CM Punk's first WWE match. But sadly, not provable definitively, unless Punk himself answers the question. But I still left a thread hanging earlier, about Maven's claim that he is Punk's first WWE opponent. It turns out I found one more match that might dispute the claim depending on how you define a WWE opponent. On the same date as the CM Punk vs Khalsa Singh match, that night's episode of Raw featured a one-off appearance by the Legion of Doom, who lost a very short match to then Raw Tag Team Champions Rob Van Dam and Kane. This would end up being the final time the legendary Road Warriors / Legion of Doom would appear on WWE television, as Hawk would pass away in October 2003. What you might not know, however, is that this wasn't LOD's last match for the company, as at the following night's SmackDown taping, Hawk and Animal would wrestle a non-televised match against a South Carolina-based wrestler called Doug Delicious, and you guessed it, CM Punk. In trying to get some concrete proof that this match happened, I discovered that CM Punk in 2018 actually replied to a tweet about this match, cryptically saying the story behind this one is great. I guess that's some fairly solid evidence that the match did happen. So to finally put Maven's claim to bed, if you only count active WWE roster members, then yes, he might be right. But he also faced some genuine WWE legends beforehand, who were looking to make a comeback at the time. Some further digging for information about the LOD match led me to, of all places, a July 2018 episode of Something Else to Wrestle With, the short-lived WWE Network version of Bruce Pritchard's podcast, which has a whole episode about CM Punk's arrival in the company. Bruce, despite my fears going into watching this, actually offers a great deal of insight. He states that Punk was perceived by WWE brass as an indie wrestler everyone was raving about, but to them, he didn't look like a wrestler. To quote him, referring to Punk's 2003 matches, nobody saw a whole lot in him. In 2003, Punk was wearing the long shorts similar to the ones he would wear in his Revolution 2022 match with MJF, but in 2005, he had adopted the wrestling trunks he would wear for most of his career. He also notes that other Ring of Honor talents were on the radar at the time, specifically mentioning Bryan Danielson and Samoa Joe, neither of whom would be signed by the company until 2009 and 2015 respectively. Interestingly, he calls Ring of Honor a great place for young wrestlers to hone their craft at the time, but he also says that the company viewed them as just another independent wrestling promotion. They didn't do a lot of shows, and what we did see was few and far between. There was some talent there that we knew about and kept our eye on, but it was just another place to find talent. The reason I found this interesting is simple. Take a look at the giant list of talent that was closely linked to Ring of Honor, and look at how many of them are massive stars in WWE today. You could make that point about TNA and PWG as well, as they use similar talent, but the idea that ROH wasn't seen as anything special, yet many of their current stars come from there, is interesting to note. Getting back to CM Punk, Conrad Thompson directly asks about his 2003 tryout matches, and we even get to see footage from Punk's entrance that I referred to earlier, but also brief clips of the match itself, showing Punk winning with a hammerlock DDT. His finisher at the time was known as the Pepsi Plunge, which is a pedigree from the top rope. Could you imagine if he tried using Triple H's finisher as an unsigned talent looking to join the company? It's also interesting to note that John Laurinaitis, who was head of talent relations at the time, and later had an on-screen feud with Punk, according to Bruce, was advocating for Punk to be signed. Later in his career, Punk would notably rage against general manager Johnny Ace, even going as far as to parody his former gimmick as one half of the Dynamic Dudes in WCW on the 2011 Slammies episode of Raw. Finally, they briefly show a clip of the LOD match, proving that it did actually happen, though we still don't know exactly what Punk meant by the story behind this one is great. The final thing worth drawing from this WWE Network show is that Bruce notes that his 2003 tryout matches were, quote, unremarkable, and Conrad Thompson notes that he's glad they didn't sign him then. as the much respected trilogy of matches with Samoa Joe would never have happened, with the first of 3 Ring of Honor World title matches happening in June 2004. I haven't been able to find any other instances of Punk working dark matches for WWE, so I guess this must be our answer. With Punk now back wrestling in WWE rings again, I thought it might be interesting to hunt for his first time in one of their rings. So far, a match with Seth Rollins seems to be coming, with many speculating that it might grant Punk and Rollins the WrestleMania main event they both wanted. Sorry, to quote CM Punk, the night 4 of a buy one get one free extravaganza. Here's a fair warning, you're gonna see that quote flying around for the next few months, and that's nothing compared to his comments about Crown Jewel. Thank you for watching yet another wrestling channel. If you enjoyed this, please comment, like or subscribe.